The first readathon I ever participated in was the 2019 Reading Rush. I read 7 books in 7 days, and I wrote up a whole script on my thoughts on each book, and then I never ended up filming it. I'm not going to say what prompt is for which book for this readathon or for any of the other readathons, but I will put that information into the description. The first book I read for the 2019 Reading Rush was Secrets for the Mad by Dodie, or at least the second half, because I'd read the first half a while ago when I got it, but I just never finished it. I ended up giving the whole book 5 stars. My favorite stories in it were Ben's view of my concert, cooking, and best friend love. And yes, I know that Ben's view of my concert and the dinner section of cooking were not written by Dodie, but I still stand by my statement. The parts that are written by Dodie, which is spoiler alert, pretty much the rest of the book are so good. The whole book sounds uniquely like Dodie, and I believe that's in part to the lyricism of her writing style. This book was super relatable to me for probably, I think, 2 reasons. First off, Dodie and I are both Enneagram Type 4s, and secondly, most of the book is focusing on her when she was a teenager and when she was up into her early 20s. I definitely plan on rereading this in the future, if not the whole book, then definitely individual segments of it. The next book I read was In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Quiara Alegría Hudes, which is one of my favorite musicals of all time. I listened along to the cast album while reading this, and it made the experience 100 times better. The music has a message of hope and an infectious feeling of summer nostalgia that gets me feeling a certain type of way every time I listen to it, no matter what time of year it is. My favorite characters are definitely Nina and Usnavi, because I can see certain parts of myself in them. Breathe and Champagne are my favorite songs, and without fail, the opening and the finale will make me feel emotional, even if they're the only 2 songs I listen to off of the album. I'm telling you, Lin is some magical music man with powers we can only begin to try and comprehend. Like, let him write musicals with characters who live in New York, and he is guaranteed to make you cry at some point. I obviously gave this 5 out of 5 stars, with my only criticism being that sometimes the scenes didn't transition as well as they could have into the songs. The third book I read was Persephone by Loic Locatelli Kournwsky, and this is a French graphic novel that was translated into English. This is a semi-modern, fantastical retelling of the Persephone and Demeter myth. It really reminds me of Castle in the Sky, which is my all-time favorite movie, if Castle in the Sky, instead of guns, had swords, staffs, and mages. All of the characters are unique and special, and I love them all. Especially Persephone, who is the main character and is a 13-year-old student and botany expert, and Demeter, who is her adopted mother and also is a super cool mage person. Persephone has such good character design, and yellow is one of my favorite colors, so needless to say, I plan on cosplaying as her at some point in the future. This book isn't afraid to bring up themes of right and wrong and the reality of the fallout of war and its effects on civilians, which is something I don't see done often, at least not effectively. I rated this 5 stars, even though it didn't have the ending that I thought it would, but I'm still very glad that fate ended up bringing me and this graphic novel together. Then I read Lafayette in the Somewhat United States by Sarah Vowell. Trivia time, and something I didn't know until I looked up the author, but Sarah Vowell is actually the voice of Violet Parr from The Incredibles, which is great because I love The Incredibles so much. This book reminded me that Lafayette up and left his cushy French life to go fight for the not country in America because he was bored. Which is not something I would do at 19, but okay. Also, he is the most Gryffindor of all time, and I love him for it, even though I normally hate Gryffindors. Every single time George Washington got mentioned in relation to Lafayette, like as his father figure, I got way too happy. But like, when do I not get really intensely emotional and absorbed in the lives of historical figures who've been dead for over 200 years? This book is very funny. I was able to find something to laugh at least every single page. Sarah Vowell is blunt and isn't willing to idolize any of these historical figures, even Lafayette himself. The one strange thing about this book is that it isn't divided up at all. Like, there aren't any sections or chapters. I give it 5 stars, but just be warned that it does read like a really long humorous essay. Next I read Heaven to Betsy by Maud Hart Lovelace. I didn't read this copy because I only just recently bought it, but I thought you'd appreciate looking at this instead of this. This is one of those books that I will find compelling no matter how many times I reread it. Same goes for Great Gatsby and Chasing Vermeer. Something I forgot about this book is how much I love the illustrations at the beginning of each chapter. Chapter 4 and Chapter 10 have the best ones in my opinion. I love The Crowd so much, which actually surprises me because I normally don't enjoy books that are only consisting of casual hijinks and banter. The banter in this book is actually hilarious and realistic and filled with inside jokes, and it really helps the characters be as endearing as they are. Betsy is a character that I looked up to as I was growing up, and now I definitely can relate to her a lot. She is a dreamer, she is romantic, and she's also melodramatic at times. This book is quaint, it's exciting, and it is forever going to be a 5-star read for me. The second to last book I read was the screenplay for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I've watched this movie so many times, and I believe it's actually the only movie I've ever seen twice in theaters, which is a feat for me because I almost never go to movie theaters. This book is so pretty. The dust jacket under the dust jacket and the page designs are so well crafted, and I am a sucker for aesthetically pleasing things. The whole time I was reading this, I was basically just recreating the movie in my head with the characters' voices because I have burned this movie into my brain and I will never get everyone's vocal nuances out of it. My favorite thing about this script is that the dialogue is still funny to me, even though I always know what the punchline is going to be. Something that I discovered while reading this that you wouldn't know unless you read the script is that there are actually descriptions of the characters and the locations, which I thought was really cool because it's cool to find out how the author first described things before they were put on the screen. I gave the screenplay and the movie both 5 stars, and no, I don't take constructive criticism. The last book I read for the 2019 reading rush was So Long and Thanks for All the Fish by Douglas Adams, which I listened to on audiobook. So I didn't actually read it from here, but I couldn't have even if I wanted to, because I didn't get this edition until Christmas, which was a few months after the reading rush. So I love this book series so much, but I can never really tell what's going on. Everything is always such a blur, but I kind of like it that way. So at this point, I'm just fine with it. I found that I enjoy comedic sci-fi the most, and so this book series and Doctor Who and the prequel trilogy of Star Wars are very much so my thing. I wrote in my notes while reading this that I love how every character is a character no matter who they are, and while that sounds like a knockoff Dr. Seuss quote, I don't really understand what I meant by it, but hopefully some of you can decipher what I might have meant by saying that, so I thought I would leave it in anyway. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, with the only reason being that it was only a 5-hour audiobook and I really would have liked it to be at least a little bit longer. I only got through 1 book for the Owls, and I think we all know what my excuse for that is. And I didn't even read it during the actual month of the Owls, but I don't think anybody cares about that at this point, so anyway. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book perfectly encapsulates the highest highs and the lowest lows of the 1920s. It's about loneliness and hope and doing everything you can to try and get things that you will never have, and I swear if I was in Gatsby's situation, I would do the same exact thing. I don't know why, I just feel like I would. I'm a big fan of sad romanticism with mysterious characters that I can't help but want to figure out. Like with complex characters that you want to despise but you can't help being fascinated by. This book is told from a first-person, male, unreliable narrator's perspective, and while normally I wouldn't be into that, F. Scott Fitzgerald writes so well that he makes it work somehow. Nick feels like a real person even though he's the viewpoint character, and oftentimes viewpoint characters feel really bland, but he feels like he's genuinely part of the story and not just a character invented so that you could voyeuristically join in on this adventure. Not like this is an adventure you'd want to join in on, but you know what I mean. Like I said when I was talking about Heaven to Betsy, this is one of the books that I will find compelling no matter how many times I read it, even though I know all of the beats. It's still going to be so compelling and shocking to me every time I read it. It's obvious that I rated it 5 stars, and if someone could make a movie about it that I actually like, that would be greatly appreciated. Yet again, I failed a readathon, but at least this time I read 1 book during the actual readathon month. That book being The Ghost Hunters Adventure Club and The Secret of the Grand Chateau by Dr. Cecil H.H. Mills. I actually want to make a whole separate video about this book at some point, so I'm going to keep my thoughts on it here pretty brief. I found this book a lot funnier than most teen detective books, with the book itself saying that its theme is that children are idiots. and the book doesn't take itself too seriously, which I found rather refreshing. It also pokes fun at the concept of the Hardy Boys, which I greatly appreciated. For a book that is only a little over 200 pages long, it is well written and well paced, so you're never spending too much time or too little time on any part of the mystery or the story. The location and the mystery setup are very well done, and this book actually gives most of its characters character arcs and character development and complexities, which isn't really normal for most teen detective novels, since they all kind of have to reset after each book in the series. If you are tired of the monotony of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys books, but you still want to read teen detective novels, I would definitely recommend that you pick up a copy of this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it is 100% my favorite book of the year so far. While I attempted 3 readathons in 2020, the only one I actually completed was the Reading Rush. And while that bodes well for 2021's Reading Rush, it does not bode well for any other readathons I try and do this year. I meant to read 7 books, but I never got the book that I ordered that was supposed to be the 7th book. So, the first book I read was Chasing Vermeer by Lafayette. It is an art mystery solved by kids, which I first read when I was about 7 or 8, and it is a big part of the reason why I'm super into museums and art history and mysteries. Lafayette has such an intriguing writing style, and the book makes all the characters feel full and yet still stay mysterious. I rate this 5 stars every time I reread it, and it's a comfort read, and anytime I'm feeling a little down or just bored or in a reading slump, I know that I can just pick up this book, at least in its audiobook format, because I don't own a real copy of it yet, which is weird, because it's one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book, but I'm sure I'll cave in at some point and buy a physical copy, but I do think I'll keep listening to the audiobook as long as I have access to that. The next book I read was The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I watched the movie the week before I started the Reading Rush, and I cried while watching the movie, and I cried while reading the book, but I kind of knew that would happen. The book doesn't really have that much in the way of plot. A story is still told, albeit a short one, but it is simple and honest, and I kind of like it that way. It reads like a deep children's book, which I think is kind of the point. It has this feeling of childhood monumentality, where little things seem like so much more, and the world seems vast and different, and yet so small. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. I gave it 5 stars, and I'll definitely reread it in the future. Then I read Let's Declare Ourselves Winners and Get the Hell Out by Bill Malden, and I really don't know what to think about it. I just don't really know enough about the 70s and 80s history to really make a judgment call on the jokes in it. I rated it 3 stars as just a middle-of-the-road, uneducated rating, and I hope that at some point I learn more about the time period so I can come back and actually form an opinion about it, but for now it was just kind of okay. The 4th book I read was Write This Book by Pseudonymous Bosch. As with the Secret series, his writer's voice is hilarious, and since this whole book is basically just him talking in his writer's voice, I was super down with it. Most of this book is just loose writing advice, but there is a very tiny story in it. Overall, the book was only a little less than 300 pages long, but I still had a fun time reading it, and I rated it 5 stars. I'm sorry I don't really have that much else to say about the book, but I enjoyed it, and I think if you're in the market for some comedic writing advice that you can pick up the book, even though it is kind of geared towards a middle grade audience, but I still found it funny. And if you enjoyed the Secret series, it's honestly just worth picking up because it's just more of that comedy. I guess if you like the comedy of the Secret series. Basically all I'm saying is that if you like the voice of Pseudonymous Bosch in the Secret series, pick up this book because that's all it is. But also be warned that if you have never read the Secret series, it kind of spoils some parts of the Secret series. Not really, but like, kind of. So that would be my only spoiler warning about that book. Don't pick it up if you've never touched a Secret series book, because a lot of it will either be spoiling you or will just not make sense. So, but the most of it isn't that. I don't know. Make your own judgment call. I think it's a funny book. I think you should pick it up, but it'll be funnier if you already appreciate his other series. The 5th book I read was Now I Rise by Kiersten White, which is the 2nd book in the Conqueror's Saga trilogy. I was so scared that this book would be affected by the mid-book slump, but it's actually quite good. While in the first book I liked both Radha and Ladu's point of views equally. In this book, I really liked Radu's point of view a lot more than Lada's, and it really had nothing to do with, I think, anything. I just think I enjoyed his plotline more, because I think he was doing more, even though he wasn't. I don't really know. I can't really explain why. I don't know. I don't really know why I liked his plotline better. Because Lada was doing stuff, but, like, I don't know. I think I just care too much about Radu, and Lada can handle herself, so I was stressed out whenever we weren't with Radu, and even when we were with Radu, I was stressed out. So, yeah, I was stressed out reading the whole book. And it's a long book, so I was stressed out for, like, 2 to 3 days, which is not fun. The writing of this book actually manages to be detailed without being flowery, which for a fantasy adjacent book is actually quite impressive in my opinion. Since this is a sequel to other books, and also because I don't want to spoil anything in general, I'm going to make 2 out of context statements. And if you've read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about, and if not, you won't know what I'm talking about. But I still feel the need to share these feelings. And so the first one is that Cyprian breaks my heart, and the second one is I want to punch Mehmed in the face so much and then say I'm sorry, but not really mean it. This book was a solid 5 stars for me, especially since it is a good sequel, which I have not read in so long. I've been let down so hard in the past year or so with all the other sequels I've tried to read, so this book automatically is way better than those by being a sequel that it all works, so it gets 5 stars! Yay! The very last book I read for a readathon was One Day by David Nichols. I listened to it on audiobook, and at first I was very jarred by the narrator, but I eventually got used to her. But if I were to reread this book, I would definitely just read it in a physical copy, because I did not like the narrator's voice all that much, but I also would like to see how the book is truly formatted on the page, since the whole concept of the book is formatted differently. It wasn't necessarily divided into chapters as far as I could tell. It was more into, like, periods in time. Again, I can't tell without having a physical copy, so I would like to read it again, but just with not the audiobook, because that was not an audiobook that I'd care to listen to again. The writing style was pretty normal, but the pacing was actually really well done, considering the point of the story is that you only ever meet up with these 2 characters on one day over the course of like 20 years? Yeah, it's 20 years. So the pacing could have been really bad, but it actually was very impressive how each year that we kept meeting up with them was well paced, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on too much or that what was happening was weird, and when we were spending time with them, it didn't seem like too long or too little. It was very well paced, and that was very interesting for me because I wasn't expecting it to be that well done. I don't know. I'm still processing what happened in the book. Like, the last 25% of the book, I'm having emotional whiplash over that book, and I really can't have very many cohesive thoughts on it. So I rated it 5 stars, but that's a 5 stars without really much to say about it because, yeah, I really like Em and Dex. I like Dex a little bit more, I think, but that's probably because he reminds me of Jamie Wellerstein, and I love The Last 5 Years. So, but also the book kind of reminds me of The Last 5 Years. It reminds me of La La Land. It reminds me of parts of Jim and Pam's relationship from The Office and other things, and I can't remember what the other things it reminds me of are. It'll remind me of Out of Love when I read that. A lot of things. I can't remember what it reminds me of. I know I wrote down a list and I can't find it, so those are the things it reminded me of, but it definitely reminds me of more things. It reminds me of tropes of romantic comedies and romantic stories that I can't remember why I'm thinking of them, but I know they exist. So, if you're interested in a book that's just real, because the book is a very real feeling, if you're just interested in a book that's very real feeling and grounded and also set in England, which for some reason I didn't realize it was set there until I read it, but that's where it's set. So if you're interested in a book like that, read it. And also if you like any of the things I said it feels like, then read it, because I think you might enjoy it. It's also just like a book that's worth reading. It's not really like a book that I would be like, it's now your favorite book, but I was glad I read it. So there you have it, all of my thoughts for all of the books I've managed to read for readathons thus far. I don't think I'll ever make a wrap-up ever again, but if you made it all the way to the end of this one, being my one and only wrap-up I will ever make, congratulations! You should probably subscribe at this point, because you clearly thought I was funny enough to watch. So you can do that, or not. That's fine too. I post at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and on Tuesdays I post gameplay videos, mostly playing Nancy Drew games, and on Saturdays I post literally anything else. Sometimes book related, but most of the time, like, literally anything else.